Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining this session about urbanity and community. The session is being organized as part of the KEBAB project, that is the Knowledge Alliance for Evidence-Based Urban Practices, which is funded by the Erasmus Plus program. The project is led by the University of Cyprus, and one of the partners is Social Fringe, Interesting Untold Stories, an NGO in Zagreb, who have kindly organized the event today, and many of the members are going to be speaking. Just a few words about KEBAB. KEBAB is an educational and research project focusing on strengthening the links between academia and professional practices. It has three strands of work. One is about innovative learning, mostly focusing on the use of real-life urban projects in teaching, as well as getting students involved with the profession, exchanging knowledge, and getting the students to know practitioners. Another strand is entrepreneurship, specifically looking at business models and more generally ways to embed research tools and research findings in professional practice. And finally, the last strand is about co-creating urban knowledge, mostly as a consequence of the project activities and the exchange between academics, researchers, students, professionals. This event is our second capacity building event, and that means that it aims at developing knowledge for professionals and students who will become professionals to improve, strengthen their capacity and skills to perform in the field. That is all from me. We have a slight change of program, meaning that Luca Lipsync is going to speak first, and I hope he's here. Are we still waiting for some of the? No, it's not. Daphne, you're speaking first.
Hi, I'm Daphne from Sfius.
We cannot hear you for some reason. At least I can't.
Speakers. Now, do you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Daphne from Sfius, and I'm one of the 4 members of our team participating in KEBAB project. And I'm gonna speak the first until 10:30, when Luca Lipsync, one of our colleagues, will continue with his part. Maybe I should simply start to use the time. And I will start with sharing the screen and with showing you some slides, trying to explain in the first chapter more generally what could be considered the contribution of an NGO sector in our educational part, but also practice of, let's say nowadays, architecture and urbanism in the city. Now on the screen you can see some diagram, which is a diagram of, let's say, different parts of the process that NGO sector is conducting in the overall discussion of urban conditions in the cities today. And basically my whole presentation will be based on the examples of different initiative projects and my participation together with different colleagues, not only from the discipline of architecture and urbanism. I am myself architect, but we always work multidisciplinary with different disciplines from humanities and social sciences predominantly, with people from cultural sector, from art sector, but also with different public institutions on the level of the city, on the level of the neighborhoods. We also constantly work with the student population, with young professionals, with different universities, and we plug in as extracurricular activities in the education of, for example, our local faculties of philosophy and humanities and of architecture. In this diagram, what you can see is that our predominant activity is mapping certain phenomena in qualitative terms over a certain problematic, dealing with certain problematic, and always connected to a particular territory. The projects we conduct or participate in, join, are always longer term projects. They last over several years, and basically the main body of our work is field work. It's working on the site, with the site, monitoring conditions on the site, in which is very important to map local actors in space, whether those are initiatives, institutions, individuals, etc., different users of a particular space that we are monitoring. That enables us to make some kind of, let's say, qualitative analysis, which in the overall process of thinking and rethinking the development or the betterment or even the problems of a certain territory, works as a complement to other methodologies, which are, let's say, more statistical, more data-based, more, how to say, working with the hardware of the space in many occasions. What we try to bring in is to sense the pulse of life function over a certain territory. In that process, what is very important is the communication in two phases. Communication with the local users in collecting the information, in mapping the territory, and also communication of our findings in phases over years to the general public, but also to giving feedback to these local users. This communication can take different formats. Sometimes, can you go on? Sometimes we give presentations with demonstrating certain material that we collected on the site. Very often it's footage. We use photography and video recordings a lot. For example, this was one project where we dealt with an important part of our city, which is the riverfront, that is a very distinguished element of the city of Zagreb in Croatia, where we live. And it's basically, with the mountain, one of the key points of the development of our city, which constantly is being used as a very important void space resource for this city. There are several phenomena. For example, this was about a failed project, which was supposed to be a big hospital with different facilities for the whole city, but even for the region. It was a failed project, which over time later on had media coverage. And this one was kind of reaction to different kind of media abuse and misuse of this territory. Go on. So it was a ruin. We presented each state. A lot of citizens were never there because it's, let's say, space in transition and potentially even dangerous. Go on. And this was conducted in series of public presentations in different instances, in local governmental spaces, in some cultural venues, and it was even done in collaboration with artists of independent cultural scene, which is also NGO based in Zagreb and very active. So, for example, this image shows the performance we did about building and the failure of building of this hospital. With what you can see on the wall is all the follow-up, all the historical press clipping over time that we collected and exposed to the public. Go on. And we basically made a performance trying to represent basically the main floor plan with all the departments, all the services regarding public health that today's ruin was supposed to deliver to the citizens of Zagreb. Go on. So basically, we constructed, go on, the plan, we did all the departments, and even now in pandemic times, this site and this failed project gain even more importance in its misuse. Go on. This is still another initiative, another way of discussing the riverfront and the river space as a very important interface for the citizens of our city. Go on. Where in the local independent culture, which is cultural space, which is being located also on the riverfront, in the factory, which is no longer working, but now it's been used for cultural purposes. We mounted an archive about urbanistic development of this space in the city. Go on. With presenting a kind of selection of material which we as architects and urbanists selected and curated to expose to the people, that they can take their copies, assemble their readers, go through it, sit in the space and read. Go on. This all was complemented with several public discursive panels where we were inviting different specialists on the topic, mostly about water management in the city, people with from different institutions of the city dealing with this issue, as well as all the neighbors that are using this space or other type of users. Go on. This is another project where we tried where we worked in the middle of the city, in the very big part of the city, which was conceived in the 19th century, and it has a block structure. So we made a kind of artifact. We brought it on the street in order to collect public opinions over a couple of issues that we selected as the most important for the particular part of the city, which is undergoing a severe process of gentrification already over 10 or 15 years. At that time, when we started this process and we made this, we called it the neighborhood table, which was basically a couple of blocks that we wanted to map out and get the inhabitants' opinion on certain issues. Go on. So we basically put it in the street. The gentrification process of that area is also to a big extent due to a festival that is taking place there. It's a commercial festival tied to so-called creative industries. This whole and its annual festival, and we simply plugged in as some kind of anti-gentrification editorial, revising the territory where the festival is taking place, but plugging in the programmatic agenda of the festival over 1 week of its duration. Go on. So basically, different people were putting the certain tags and indexes upon our questions and filling up this table as some kind of artifact map. Go on. We were bringing table in the courtyards, talking to different, having given some meetings with different local personalities that are important for the life of that part, for the daily life of that part of the city. Go on. Also, what we've discovered as a very vivid but vulnerable part of users and population were the people of the older age. Go on. And of course, the kids. Go on. And then we tried to bring in the festival agenda some daily highlights of the life that happens over this territory where the festival is not happening. So for example, these are the ladies from the retirement facility that is existing on that territory. This is the headmaster with this monitoring device. We had a lot of talks and preparations with them. Go on. We did also some other types of interfaces in terms of maps and go on, which we discussed with, we mounted that in a store that is basically a store dealing with health issues connected to celiac, and we simply made a pop-up in that store, and whoever would come by in the store would also kind of see our material and reflect on the urbanistic issues of the neighborhood. Go on. We also invited young professionals and artists to reflect, to also come to that store. We held a workshop with them to reflect on the material we prepared. Go on. We had a workshop session, go on, which ended up with also an exhibition event, go on, where we drafted different narratives which raised questions of the living standards in that neighborhood on top of this map that we were discussing with the users of the territory. Go on. And all this was exhibited in the local gallery, and people came to discuss then let's say the work of these young professionals and artists. Go on. And we also exposed the whole mapping that we did and all the data we collected during the process till the exhibition. Go on. Aside from that, we went to talk to different initiatives. This is again with I'm talking about the same territory. This was again with the retired people that have their association where they meet daily. Go on. Including the recreational part, which they have every morning. So we participated to their sessions. Go on. And we plugged in also their activities in the agenda of this commercial festival. Each morning of the week, all the visitors of the festival could join to exercise, to start their work day with our retired community. Go on. The other task we also, so these were the tasks connected more to cultural sector, to rising awareness of certain parts of the city, certain urbanistic problematic, and also tied to certain commercial initiatives. What I'm going to show now is this was a study commissioned by the Strategic Office of the city for city planning. Part of that study was commissioned to NGO sector. It was about surveying the current state of conditions, again, of this big part of Zagreb city, which is 19th century block structure. Go on. So this study included for us elaborate and a lot of presentations to this city, to these public instances, including different plans like this one, all sorts of mappings and representations, which should depict the pulse again of this part of the city. Go on. And one of the very important collaborators in this project was the cultural center, which was on the territory, placed in the abandoned cinema, where we were having also a plug-in in their program, which was mostly community program for kids, elderly people, entertainment, etc. For example, the football championship, they have some screenings and quiz shows, etc., etc. In this agenda, we put series of discussions and lectures about the possible revitalization of this block structure And we could put it, as you can see, there we still had the leftovers of these letters that they were using for the announcements on the cinema display, by which we were creating the interface towards the street that people can to communicate with the passers-by as well. Go on. And apart from that, for this particular task, we were publishing a kind of newspaper, which was covering different topics that we were analyzing on this territory. And go on, which is the end of this. Can you just switch off? So I'm having it here. Yeah, you should just a second to get out of this screen.
Hello.
Ilaria, can you switch off, please, my presentation?
I will try.
Because we got frozen here.
The presentation is not from you, is it? It's from
Dario.
It's from Dario.
Yeah, but it's still here. Yeah, I'll even use.
Okay. I think that worked. You're muted though now, Daphne.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, this needed a little bit of presentation. So what we were doing as a medium of communication with the broader public as well as with inhabitants was publishing this in 1,000 copies, distributing it different places, putting it in the cafes, in the street, on the kiosks, etc. We were covering different topics like the genesis of the part of the city, historical overview. We also always do a lot of archive research. We were covering certain phenomena like the local crafts that survived in that neighborhood. We had a competition for the nicest block interior, discussing certain photographs of before and after, presenting our activities, also having interviews with certain neighbors that were more active in the community, and so on. The thing is that this took a lot of time, and it was kind of expensive to make this product, and a lot of work to prepare an issue of, let's say, 20 pages per month. What we are doing now with Spheus, so these were different initiatives that me as an architect collaborated and participated in over my NGO experience. And now we are doing this program with the Social Fringe. We're having different type of more simple communicational products. which are some kind of fanzines, which we issue for every project that we deal with, and we present the temporal state of the project and the findings that we are at. For example, this fanzine is dedicated to the project that we are working on, which is in the small city of Karlovac, not anymore in Zagreb, where we are based, which Luka and Tomislav will explain further on. It's an ongoing project. It's again dealing with a very important part of city of Karlovac, which is the riverfront, which people use as leisurescape. It also gets flooded and has its complexity. So I will let them continue, and then in the end Dario will make a wrap up of let's say to frame it back in more theoretical and methodological terms of what we are up to now, and what also we are plugging as side projects to deal with this exchange with academia in how to coach students directly on the task, on the terrain, about this kind of practice.
Thank you very much, Daphne. And I will give the word to Luka. We have time for discussion at the end. If anyone has an immediate question, you can put it in the chat, and perhaps we can have a short break after Luka's presentation to answer those, if there are any. Luka, thank you for joining us. Luka is also an architect and the founder of the Plus Collective. The floor is yours.
Yes, exactly. Thanks. So just to start my presentation, just a second. So share screen, right? Okay, great. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, I do.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. So to start off, again, I'm Luka, I'm an architect from Karlovac, and I'm going to try and show you a bit the situation that is in Karlovac, that we are having these problems with the urbanistic and spatial planning decline in the last 30 years through a couple of examples. But just to tell you something about Karlovac, so Karlovac, the ideal city, was built in the last part of the 16th century. So as you can see here on this aerial view of the city, you can see the famous Karlovac star. So this is the center, the starting point of Karlovac development. It was built like an ideal Renaissance city, but mostly it was used as a fortification against the Ottoman threat in that time. The further development of the city started actually at the end of the 19th century, and most of the city that we know today as Karlovac was built after the Second World War, and that is very you can see it actually here on this in this picture, how this is the old town on the banks of the Kupa and the Korana River, and then across the freeway and the railway you have this part of New Karlovac, the so-called new center that was completely built after the 1950s and was produced and planned by Karlovac architects and urbanists. So I'm going to show you on some examples of how the development, urbanistic development of the 20th century that had this kind of also a utopian socialist state of mind in hand was degraded by some decisions and decision makers in the late 90s and at the beginning of the new millennium. So the first example is a part of this new center, which was called a cultural streak. So the new center was developed in a way that everything that you needed to have in this new city, you could find it in the new center. Everything that you didn't have in the old part of town, you would have it in this new part of Karlovac, and also bigger, better, and made for the people that live there. Before the 50s, Karlovac maybe had only 15 to 20,000 inhabitants. After the 1950s, the number of inhabitants skyrocketed to 50 and to 60,000 people. So for that many people, you needed a lot of other buildings and things that would make this kind of a much bigger city work. For instance, the new marketplace, then the new judicial house, of course all of the living buildings, so the skyscrapers and everything, but also this part here of the new center. This is like the center of the center, was reserved for a big, huge cultural center that would be enough for a new city of 60,000 people. Unfortunately, this was the last part of Karlovac that was being built, and wasn't developed in time. Unfortunately, during the 90s and the decline of Yugoslavia and beginning of the Homeland War, this idea of a cultural center completely faded out. But parts of the cultural streaks, let's call it like that, was already built. So we had built the library, the art gallery, and the state archive. So this is the model how the idea for the new center was made, and you can see here, this is the freeway, the railway, and this is the new center. The part of this cultural center is here. And during I think the 60s, there were a few architectural competitions with which the municipality tried to get the best idea of how this cultural center should look like. And so this was the winning model for the cultural center, and you can see that it's really huge. It's a dimension of itself, but it has the already built library, the gallery, the archive, and then this part here with the skyscraper and with public halls and everything was never built. So this is the picture from the 80s, I think. You can see the market here. This is the judicial palace in Karlovac, and also the library, the gallery, and the archive, which make this kind of a cultural streak here. And the next picture is McDonald's in front of the judicial quarters. So the situation in Karlovac and most parts of Croatia. After the 90s was one atmosphere of almost absolutely no investments into the economy. So the Karlovac at the time was really looking forward to any kind of investments, and even at the cost of declining the already made situation with this new idea of new Karlovac. So, for instance, this is an example of how McDonald's was put right in front of the judicial palace, even though it was never planned there. But at the time, you know, money could talk, and we got this McDonald's drive-in in maybe the most important part of the public space in Karlovac, and it still is there, standing like that. Also, there were a lot of discrepancies between the building of the new market hall, which we can see here. But the interesting part here is that this market hall, it only had to have one floor above ground, but it has, like you see, the second floor and also a third floor, completely against the plans. Then also a huge Kaufland, one of the biggest Kauflands in this part of Europe, was also built in this part of town, and next to the cultural street, next to the place where the cultural center would originally be built. And it took a huge part of this city and completely changed its appearance. But maybe the worst part of these doings at the end of the 90s in Karlovac was putting the Opel car service next to the archive. So you have, as I said before, the library, the gallery, the archive, and then you would have these, the plans were to build certain public spaces, but we got an Opel car service instead, which had to be, it was designed in a way to be like this luxurious car market, but in the end it's just a service, and it's going to probably stay there forever. And now this idea of a cultural center is completely distorted with these wrongdoings that I just showed you. The irony of it all, that the mayor of Karlovac at that time was an architect, and he gave a green light for all of these investments, which were, and also today are, really unlogical when you know the history, and when you go about the new center and just, you know, see that how are some things here and others aren't. But we can't say that everything is lost in Karlovac. In front of the judicial palace, this was the first architectural competition, a very successful architectural competition in Karlovac after the fall of Yugoslavia. It was a architectural competition for a public space, for a statue to the people that lost their lives in the Homeland War. It's placed between the judicial palace and the McDonald's, and it's probably today it's one of the most popular hotspots in Karlovac. A lot of young people come there to meet and to play or to go somewhere else in the city. The other part of this urbanistical decline happened in Banja. So Banja is the part of town on the left side of the river Kupa. Even at the end of the 19th century, Banja was always designed as an industrial hub of Karlovac. So you had industry on the left side of the river Kupa, and you have the residential quarters on the right side. This industry on Banja developed really much after the Second World War. But then in the 90s, how this industry completely declined. We had a problem with huge industrial spaces that didn't have any kind of place there anymore, because there was no jobs, there were no workers, there was no income. So to the rescue comes a huge huge shopping center called Supernova that was placed in this industrial part right next to the freeway. This freeway in Karlovac was always intended to be like not a lifeline, but more like a road that would connect Zagreb, the capital, with the south of Croatia. It went through Karlovac, but it was designed in a way that it doesn't disturb Karlovac that much. What Supernova did was they obviously had people in the right places and paid a lot of money to get this intersection or a direct connection to this freeway, which was completely against any kind of code or against the plans. And now this transversal road that went through Karlovac is started to become like one of the main roads in Karlovac, and it's becoming kind of a, let's say, a pest, because we have a lot more cars, you know, a lot more transport that we didn't want to have inside of our city. And the third and the third theme is Rakovac district. Daphne already told you about the project that we were working on the Korana River with the hotel and the city river swimming quarters. This is the aerial view of the so-called Foginovo part of Karlovac. So this is the Rakovac Street. Next to it, the Korana River. And on the Korana River, we had a huge mill that was used to produce wool. This mill was run down at the beginning of the 20th century, and on its place, the Karlovac then built a hotel, the so-called Hotel Korana, which at the time was the biggest hotel in Karlovac, but it was built in a way that it accepted its surroundings as much as it could. One of the examples of how they did that was this terrace here, and you see the trees here. They are growing from the park through the terrace. So the architects back then, they didn't want to take the trees away, but they worked around them. So they, in a way, worked with nature. The hotel, in the coming years, the hotel developed much more, became a bigger building, but still it was built in a way that it was connected with nature and with the river Korana. Unfortunately, during the 90s, the hotel was completely devastated. And at the beginning of the, I think 2012, the city of Karlovac sold the hotel to a private investor. But the investor had to, when he bought the hotel, he had two options. He could either make a complete reconstruction of the hotel as it was, or he had to make an architectural competition on how the new hotel will look like. Of course, the investor, unfortunately, in this example, had plans of his own, and he did something. He built something that neither was a reconstruction, and he didn't have. He didn't want to do the architectural competition in any way. Not only that, but so yeah, this is the. You saw how the hotel looked, and now this is the hotel today. One part of the hotel. He's trying to build the rest of it in the upcoming years. But before that, he built this huge wall that surrounded his plot, where the hotel would be built. And of course, this wall completely changed the surroundings. It devastated this connection between the private plot and the public plot of the Foginova riverfront. And this did not go well with the citizens of Karlovac. So we started to have a lot of campaigns in order to show the Karlovac municipality how this wall and the idea that this investor had was wrong, and how this public space is going to decline. And we started to have a lot of workshops, and also we started to collect signatures in order to get this wall removed. But I will talk about it in the upcoming slides. Next to the hotel, as you see, this small waterfall on the Korana River, and this is the wool mill that I spoke of earlier. So this waterfall is actually not a natural waterfall, it's an artificial waterfall. It was made to get the water accumulation in order to get the water into the hydro plant that was based here near the water mill. This hydro plant was removed also when the mill was destroyed, and there was no intention of getting the hydro plant back until a few years ago, when on this same waterfall, a private investor wanted to build, and is still in the process of trying to build a mini hydro plant, but we come to reactions and actions. But this whole part of the Korana River is now being completely, or trying to be completely, destroyed by the hotel and by the mini hydro plant, and that's why the citizens of Karlovac made a group of citizens that was called Spasimo Koranu. It means let's save Korana, the Korana River. So as you can see, this is a wall, destroyed wall, where you can see the trees in the background, and these trees on the Korana River are like a trademark of this part of Karlovac. These civil actions were were all around in the local news and also in the state news. We collected signatures in order to show the Karlovac municipality and also the Ministry of Building of how this wall was being done illegally, and also how it wasn't being built up to the urbanistic plans of Karlovac. And also this was one action connected to the mini hydro plant, where the citizens, they made like a mock-up of how this mini hydro plant would look like and where it would be. So these were very popular activist actions, and in a way they started this idea in Karlovac that although you're a civilian and you're not politically engaged, that your voice is important, and then your voice can be heard if you are organized and you have a specific end goal that you want to achieve. For instance, with this mini hydro plant, although it had to be already built, the whole building process stopped. With the hotel, it's a more complex situation, unfortunately, but we are also still doing what we can in order to prevent the building of the hotel as the investor wants, and to bring it back to the idea of building it in accordance to urbanistic plans. I also wanted to show you how Karlovac, what other non-formal activist actions are being taken part in Karlovac. For instance, Dani Radičeve. It's a festival of the Radičeva Street in Karlovac, in the Karlovac Old Town. So unfortunately, this street, this is the Radičeva Street in Karlovac, normally looks like this. There is no people here. There's nothing to do here. This wasn't like that up until the 90s. Radičeva was like the main road in Karlovac. A lot of bars, a lot of people buying stuff and just living this, you know, city kind of lifestyle. But unfortunately, the street looks today. So the people that still reminisce about those good old times, how the street once looked, said, okay, let's do something about it. And they started this festival of the Days of the Radičeva Street, who take local artists, local musicians, local artisans, and for a couple of days in the last days of September, for every year now for the past 4 to 5 years, have this. This is an unconventional festival because it's completely there is no money in it. There's no backup finances that make it possible. It's all up to the people that want to participate. So this is one activist activist festival that tries to show people how things once were, but also how things can be. Then we come to this also informal activist group called Karlovačka Pozitiva, like Karlovac Positivity. It was made up of students from the Karlovac Gymnasium, and they were led by known Zagreb activist called Saša Šimpraga, who came to Karlovac, and with the students, he started to show them how they can actively participate in changing their surroundings, making it better, but through political activism. So for instance, like in the old town in Karlovac, you have this public toilet that was completely run down. So he told them, okay, you have a public toilet. How can you change it? You have to first see what the problem is. Then you have to research how to which people you have to connect to, and to just actively show them why this is a bad thing, why this cannot be, and why they should invest in reconstructing such public quarters, for instance, this public toilet, and all of the also the water spouts in the city, which were completely run down. They talked with the city, and they completely reconstructed them. And also, I don't know if you can see this here, but it says there was a tree. Once there was a tree here, so they would find these little pieces of grass which were totally neglected for the I don't know how much years, and they told the Karlovac municipality, why don't you plant a new tree here? This Karlovačka Pozitiva was very active, and almost all the problems that they showed to the Karlovac municipality, they succeeded in their plans. So trees got planted, the water spouts got reconstructed, the public toilet got reconstructed, and it's a great example of how really young people, because these are high schoolers, but how even high schoolers, if they have a good leadership and also good ideas, how they can make a change in urban development. And the last example is, so this is a part of Karlovac near the what's the word? Near the bus station, near the main bus station. So this is a square that was actually never completely developed. It was built in the 50s or 60s, and it's used as a connection point between old Karlovac and new Karlovac. So this was a public space, which was half of it was from. What was it? Just one moment. Property, I'm sorry. One part of it was property of the Karlovac municipality. The other property, part of the property, was a private property. This square here, this part of Karlovac was underdeveloped for the last 50 to 60 years, and in the last decade there was one investor from one building firm that wanted to build a huge tower. As you can see, this is this residential building. This is this tower, and now next to it, this investor wanted to build like 20+ story building, huge. It would be probably the in volume the biggest skyscraper, maybe not in whole of Croatia, but in most of the Croatia. And not only that, but it's really ugly. Maybe the most important thing about this location here was that in the general urbanistic plan, there is a notion that on this location you have to make an architectural competition in order to make plans to build something. The investor wanted to bypass this this notion same as the one on the Korana River, but the citizens of Karlovac, as they saw what happened to the Korana River, this time they were vigilant and wary, and they when there was a public forum going about this building here, they came to the municipality and directly told the investor and the city municipality that they don't want something like that in the city. The thing is that the city listened to its citizens. So this project is now completely out of the picture, and we are going to have a very big architectural competition in the coming months here in Karlovac. So I would say that although most of people don't know about it, but this is maybe the biggest success that civil activism in Karlovac has yet produced. And hopefully this is going to be like an example of how to work in accordance to public law in the future. Also, maybe now the crown of all this activism in Karlovac. So Karlovac is also famous, or was famous, for its army barracks. So on the complete area of Karlovac, I think it had maybe 16 army barracks. That's the ratio between civilians and army people in Karlovac was maybe the biggest in all of Yugoslavia. After the fall of Yugoslavia and in Croatia, what happened is when the army went outside of the city, we got a huge surplus of these army barracks that didn't have any kind of function. They were just spaces, and they were rotting away and becoming very dangerous to the public. And here you can see the old town in Karlovac, and parallel on the other side in the new center there was this one huge army barrack called Lušić, which through workshops and public forums that took for about 10 years, we came to an agreement with the state of Croatia and the Karlovac municipality. Last year we had, I don't know if you ever heard of Europan. We had the first competition, Europan competition, a very big Europan competition in Karlovac, and we got the first awarded architectural plan for the Lušić barracks that are now going to be, in the upcoming 10 to 15 years, they are going to become a true new center of Karlovac, this cultural center that I was talking about at the beginning. Now we made a full circle, and finally this cultural center is, and also a new center for Karlovac, is going to be developed in these old army barracks. That's what I wanted to say, that through public activism, even in small towns like Karlovac, be it from a civil perspective or architectural perspective, we can make a lot of good and quality things only if we are active and we don't think that somebody else is going to do those things for us. So this was my presentation. I hope I was clear. And hopefully if you have some questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you very much, Luca.
Thank you
do you want to stop sharing your presentation?
Yes, I will stop sharing.
just going to ask you quickly, are you going to be here until the end of the event, or do you need to leave? Because I know we changed the schedule.
Yes, unfortunately, I have to leave.
Okay, so let's see if there are any questions for you.
Okay,
so we
great.
will have the opportunities to do them now. So to the participants, does anyone have any questions or comments for Luca? You can switch your camera on and talk if you want, or you can put a question in the chat. Let's give them a minute.
Okay, stop share. I stopped sharing.
Fight.
They understood everything.
Well, certainly a comment. Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
Maybe I'll ask you something, if you don't mind. I thought the second last, I think it was the second last or third last initiative you presented was very interesting. The Karlovac Positiva,
exactly,
the students, the high school students. As you said, it was effective because there was good leadership for the students to take action. It almost felt like a mentoring program where the students were taught to analyze, identify a problem, analyze, describe the problem. So that's from the urban point of view, but also some kind of civil education where they are taught, who are the authorities in charge for this, who should you contact. But you said it was an activist from Zagreb who went to Karlovac to do this, but I was wondering, how did this come about? Was it the initiative of the activist herself? Was it the students? Was there a sort of mediator between them?
There was a mediator between them. So we have a couple of NGOs in Karlovac, and I think the NGO called K-Matrix, they normally work in the fields of civil activism and art. They made a project with Sasha, with the activist from Zagreb, and the idea was exactly this: how to build a critical mass in Karlovac in order to change things. We had a presentation like a week before we started having these workshops with Sasha, in order to get to know him and to see what he already did before in Zagreb. And in Zagreb, he has an activist group called 1% za grad. It means 1% for the city. And he showed us how with the smallest effort you can change very specific things in your city. The themes that he normally works with are public drinking water and trees. And when he came to Karlovac, he immediately implemented those themes. So the water spouts, the missing trees and everything. And then he asked the students, okay, what else do you think we could do? So they came to the idea of this public toilet being restored and everything. But it was this moment, this activist, but also a bit of a political way of thinking was important, because he chose the students from the Karlovac gymnasium. Why? Because the mayor of Karlovac is the ex principal of the Karlovac gymnasium. So these were in a way his students, so he couldn't say no to them, So you have to also try and think you have to be a bit sneaky is not the best word, but you have to be smart in that way, how to get the most out of the situation.
Thank you. Very interesting. Does anyone have any quick question for Luca before we move on to the other presentations? Okay, we'll continue the discussion
Thanks.
at the end without you. And I think it's Tomislav next.
Okay, so bye guys.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can, Tomislav. Welcome. Tomislav is from the University of Zadar. I'll leave the floor to you.
Yeah, just a second so I can share my screen, and I hope this will work. Yeah, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, my name is Tomislav Gustincic. I'm like Luca, I'm a native of Karlovac, and I'm currently working as a teaching and research assistant at the Department of Ethnology and Anthropology. I'm an anthropologist and a cultural anthropologist and ethnologist by vocation, with a master's degree from Zagreb. Currently doing my postdoctoral research on a completely different subject, but I also worked and I'm currently still a collaborating researcher with SFIUS and the organization secretary. So my idea is to sort of, Luca presented you some good and bad examples, and you know, these issues of urbanism and architectural competitions. But when you come in Karlovac, there is one thing which is out of discussion, and that's the city core, which he showed you in his presentation, which I will be talking more about right now. So yeah, just to summarize again, if you know at least where Zagreb in terms of Croatia is as the capital, Karlovac is like a 30-minute drive from there. And I love this print screen because it summarizes in essence what about the city, that it's a city in central Croatia. The number of population is wrong. Since the 2021 national census, the entire county lost what is estimated about 14,000 people, but is presumed to be even more than that, the real number to be even more. And so it's the administrative center of the Karlovac County, and it's located on the highway and the railway. And it is most known for its rivers, right? It's called the city on 4 rivers because within its administrative area, 4 rivers converge into one. And of course, there was an old joke that the 5th river is beer because we had a beer industry in the city. We still have, but it's now owned by Heineken. So Luca mentioned the expression, the Karlovac star, we call it Zvezda, which is literally in English star, is the historical core of the city of Karlovac and contemporary city district, right? One of the central city districts. And you can see why it's named the star on this picture more easily. It has a hexagonal frame because, as Luca mentioned, and so shortly to run through this, the city was founded in the 16th century as an Austrian military fort or an outpost. It was called a Festung, and its original name was Karlstadt. Karlovac is the Croatian version of the name. It means Karl city because it was named after the Archduke Karl, who founded the Austrian Archduke Karl, who made the decision to build a city. It received its municipal rights in the 18th and late 19th century, and sort of only in the late 19th and early 20th century, it started developing and expanding with its first urbanist plans being made. However, only in the 20th century, with the establishment of the socialist system and socialist Yugoslavia, it started really expanding in urban place. Sorry, I'm in my office and people are constantly knocking in. It started really expanding. There was an interesting situation, which I will talk about, that actually hampered the city's expansion until the socialist period. So it was planned and designed in terms of high Renaissance military engineering, what is called the Bastion Fort or Trace Italienne, or it was called a fortified city. So it was both a city and a fort, with its distinctive features being the hexagonal polygonal fortifications, consisting of outer earthworks with bastions, and an orthogonal street system featuring a main square, which you can see right in the center. The other squares in the old city came by accident, actually. one which is located here. You can see the trees. Actually, was a civilian block that burned down, and the other here sort of became a fair again by accident, because this was the here you could see the exit from the city. Although in Karlovac, when somebody asks you about the star, everybody will say it's a Renaissance city. However, not much of the Renaissance is really left over, except of the street system, right? So it features mostly high or late Baroque utilitarian, military, and housing architecture. Two churches, which is the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox Church. It features also neoclassical bourgeois palaces that were built in the 19th century, such as one here, which is actually now the music high school and elementary school, and of course military structures such as this neoclassical army barrack here, or what was cadet school and an army barrack here. And of course it features early 19th century urban housing and modern urban housing, so sort of this blocks that were developed starting in the interwar period. It's interesting that before 1945, actually, the city was still surrounded by its fortification system. And unfortunately, the city or the municipality could do nothing about it, because even though it had all municipal rights, the earthen walls that were around the city and the fortification system was actually under direct government, let's say, command or management. So the city was sort of surrounded by these walls, which were presenting a huge issue, both sanitary and mostly sanitary to the citizens, but they couldn't destroy the walls until the central government then in Belgrade sort of gave the allowance to destroy the walls because they were no longer useful. And although most of the walls are destroyed, there are some, the early modern and socialist urban planning actually followed the outline. You can see this block here, which was actually developed in the 1930s, and it completely follows what was then the Bastion. And you can see that the socialist period actually made in the 1950s parks, which were open to for the public, which followed the sort of earthworks that surrounded the city. There are, due to local artists, so this is sort of some of the Baroque features and the most recognizable spaces of Karlovac, which are mostly the work of a singular architect from the 18th century called Josef Stiller, who was actually a Czech architect who became the master engineer and architect of the city. He did both the Orthodox Church and the tower of the Roman Catholic Church, civilian palaces or bourgeois palaces, as well as some other objects. And you can see basically his architectural handwriting in the way that he did these. Double pilasters are also copied within the church and so on, and this mansard roofing on other projects. The star, although the city started expanding in the 1950s, the star started degrading in the 1950s. Both its architecture and its social fabric, due to people moving out to the new districts of the city, but also because of other circumstances, right? People were not investing anymore in their buildings. The urban degradation actually accelerated with the wartime destruction in the 1990s, although not after the war, almost all the buildings that were destroyed were mostly rebuilt, except those belonging to the Serbian Orthodox Church because of the sort of ethnic tensions and because of its marginal position when it Croatian society. The Serbian Orthodox Church didn't have the funds available to restore its buildings. But the urban degradation actually came in the 2000s with the processes that Luca described. So with the building of the McDonald's, with the shopping centers outside of the city, in which most of the content that was in the city itself sort of dispersed and left it, leaving the city basically empty of any function or public events, except a sort of retirement home, some schools and so on, which further increased its degradation, which is basically due to sort of neoliberal public and urban management. Attempts to solve this, to halt this degradation started in the 1970s. In 1979, the city celebrated its 400 years of existence, or 400 years of history, and there was this huge salvation conservation project, which resulted in the so-called White Book, which is a white paper with technical details on how to revitalize the city, but it was never implemented. It was written in 1979, but it was never implemented. It was too ambitious and it's utopian in its design, and sort of all revitalization plans actually stopped until 2010 and 2014, when under civilian or public pressure, the city started doing something, which is sort of attributed to the aforementioned mayor, which also taught at the Karlovac High School or gymnasium, who's also a catechism teacher. So he taught Roman Catholic catechism, which shows this change in municipal policies, but I think not for the better, but more ambivalent change. Before that, this is an article from 2009. Karlovac, the city on 4 rivers, right, was described as a dying city. So the article asked, why is Karlovac once one of the most developed cities? Because it had a strong industry. Since the end of the war, the 90s war, slowly but surely going backwards. A record holder in terms of number of unemployed, culturally dead. It has become only a big dormitory for its citizens who can't find work, social life, and fun only in Zagreb. But it has a monument to a frog and to a fetus, and a network of new expensive roads leading nowhere. You can see sort of the sarcasm in the article written here. So Karlovac was described as an urban, as a dying city. Interestingly, the idea of a dying city started with the star, but sort of expanded to the entire city as such, that the entire, not only the star or the historic core, but that the entire city is dying away. So what happened following the sort of shift in city policies from 2010 and in 2014, that we got the urbanist management plan for the star in 2017, and that we got a management plan for the star, parentheses, zone A of the cultural and historical urban site of the city of Karlovac. So I was discussing up till now sort of a city district or an urban area or an urban territory, but now suddenly we have this category of a historical and urbanist site. And what does it mean? Because in fact, the city historic core has a special and privileged status in Karlovac, not only because of it was the city up until the 20th century, but because it's actually a cultural heritage site. So officially, it's the cultural and historical site or complex of the city of Karlovac, which is listed under the protected cultural goods list and by the Croatian National Heritage Registry. The Croatian term is kulturno-povijesna cjelina, which would mean historical, cultural and historical whole, as an urban whole or urban complex, but I'll be using other terms. I'll be mostly calling it a heritage site to sort of make it easier. So what is a cultural and historical heritage site? According to the national laws, it's a settlement or part of a settlement, as well as a wider area protected as a cultural good. So it's immovable and material cultural heritage and a heritage site. And because of the legal definition being so broad as to not specify what does it mean, the Ministry of Culture and Media has other documents describing that this type of site is a unique agglomeration or collection of city or rural buildings that have extraordinary historical, archaeological, artistic, scientific, social, or technical importance, which are between them interconnected to the extent of carrying spatially recognizable characteristics. So you can see on the example of the star that why would it be a cultural and historic site, right? So it was actually made as such during the socialist period, starting from it became subject to special regulation in 1948 with a city municipal ordinance. It was then protected as a monument of culture in 1962 in the socialist period. And then again in the 1990s, it was listed as a cultural good in the sort of independent state of Croatia. Although it's a cultural and historic site, so there I'll show you the extent of the preservation and conservation of the site. The entire territory is marked as a heritage site, but it also has individual cultural or historic monuments within it. So the churches and so on are exempt from the heritage site and are sort of heritage sites by themselves. And it's sort of the conservation during the socialist period sort of reflect this what Lisa Kutma called the fundamental ideology of heritage preservationism today, this modernist idea of loss, because Karlovac started developing during the socialist period, and attempts to conserve and protect Karlovac as a heritage site were sort of motivated by this idea of we're going to lose heritage, we have to preserve it, this salvation ideology. And of course, this modernist idea that you can actually preserve an entire city and really transform it. So you can see here on the left picture is from the conservation study, which was done. You can see the entire extent of the historical of the protection. So up until the deep purple, the deep red is zone A, which I'll talk about mostly here. You have then the B zone and then the C zone, the most widest extent, but also other historical heritage sites such as Rakovac here or so on. You can see here, this is the urbanist management plan, sort of detailing the zones. And you can see here sort of the age of individual objects within the zone A, and sort of with the red being the most oldest, 16th, 17th century, 18th century in blue, yellow in early 19th century, and so on. And on these colors alone, you can sort of imagine which objects, which buildings are protected as individual and are sort of exempt from the wider zone. The Roman Catholic Church and the City Museum are sort of heritage sites in their own right. And you can see sort of the valorization here going on with buildings from the second half of the 20th century actually being completely devalorized within the sort of, this is the valorization plan. The Polytechnic School, the Technical High School, it's a vocational school, the senior residence home, and so on, are or sort of buildings that were built later on in this purple, or this, which was a health institution, are characterized as conflict within the urban space, so are suggested to be removed from the city. Because in Karlovac there is not only a heritage discourse, but a discourse which wants to reconstitute the city as it once was in the 16th century. So there are ideas to rebuild the city walls, which again were earthen mounds with dikes. So the idea is to remove the school and the senior citizens home from the urban space to rebuild the old school. So what is my research here and my focus? Although SPHEUS isn't actively engaging with the STAR, it sort of informs how the rest of Karlovac lives. And my question here is, what does it mean to live in heritage? Because people still live in the historical city core, and sort of what are impacts on the daily lives of people? What does it mean to live in that city? And sort of how do people express their agency and so on? And I'll show some examples. One example, when I was working in a different NGO that Luca mentioned, actually Kamatrix, a project that we did, and sort of what is heritage then, what's its position? So from an anthropological point of view, heritage is quote unquote something new. Barbara Kirschenbach-Gimbert called it a mode of cultural production, drawing on the past to produce something new in the present, right? And Regina Bendix in a series of papers wrote that heritage does not exist, be it material or intangible, does not exist before it is identified, evaluated, conserved, and celebrated. So that heritage comes into existence when it is involved in the discourse of heritage, of conservation, protection, safeguarding, and so on and so on, right? But when it starts and comes into existence, it's actually a tricky and funny category, because we have this common sense understanding of heritage, but when we start going deeper in it, it becomes something betwixt and between, right? Between private, public, national, between space, especially when we're talking about examples such as the STAR, which is a heritage site, right? Between space and place, between regimes, public management, and so on, simulacra. You know, you can have multiple categories, and indeed, such heritage sites fall into different categories. And sort of then it becomes a question of, well, what is it? You know, how do we conceptualize it at all? I'll be talking here from what happened actually from the break with the socialist period, when it actually became a problem. So this position of heritage between public and private and public and so on. The current Croatian law defines what we refer to heritage as cultural goods, and sort of it has a very broad definition of it being movable and immovable objects, archaeological sites and zones, landscapes and their parts, intangible or immaterial forms belonging to human creation, but also documentation and bibliographical heritage and buildings in which cultural goods are being preserved. Now, the contemporary term in Croatia is cultural goods, which has which basically is positions heritage in the sense of an economic category, right? Because in the sense of goods, goods, people, and capital as an economic category. This arises much from UNESCO documents, and I mean, this economic aspect of heritage has always been part of the discourse. In the 1970s, the Paris Convention was sort of made and defined cultural property, which is again heritage, as an attempt to start the traffic and international market of what is called cultural property. But what happened in Croatia was this split between just a second, between what is private or what is public or national property. So during the socialist period, private property was allegedly abolished and all was national or public property, or what was called social property, where people didn't have property rights. So you weren't an owner, for example, of an apartment in the Star, but you actually were you were the holder of tenement rights. So you were you could have every rights within the city. The term used in the socialist period was monuments of culture, and of course it was changed in the 1990s, but it's not just a terminological change. It's actually sort of reflects a deeper ideological shift that happened because the legal system of the monuments of culture sort of had its foundation in multiple laws, but mostly defined monuments as mobile and immobile objects and groups of objects important to the social community due to their archaeological, historical, sociological, ethnographic, artistic, architectural, urbanist, technical, and other scientific or cultural values. And the two legal systems are different not only in how they define it, but in the sort of on the legal systems on which are they based. So social ownership recognized that the moment that the monuments were important to the social community, and it recognized that basically people had the obligation to protect and conserve them if they held rights to them, right? But the legal system in contemporary Croatia is based on private ownership, and it recognizes that the state doesn't care, or more precisely, that the state has an interest in the monuments. So not the community anymore, but the state of the Republic of Croatia. And although this could be discussed as like pedantry, there is an important gap between the legal intention to establish something as important to the community as compared to something that is protected because it's important to the nation state, right? But this is not only an issue of post-socialism, like UNESCO has this, UNESCO legislature is written in terms of member states, and it expresses this sort of what anthropologists have called the quote-unquote national order of the world, or what Olvar Lovgren called the international cultural grammar of nationhood. The socialist legal system was based on the principles of social and national property, but in the 90s, you suddenly had the categories of individual property and rights and obligations of the owner of a cultural property, which had the impact that now, which is criticized nowadays, that suddenly you have multiple owners in a several-story high building. With several, of course, apartments. The contemporary context, the obligation of protection and conservation is divided between the owner and the state, but also or the state or its bodies, the conservation department, part of the Ministry of Culture, but it also introduced the idea of safeguarding, safeguarding cultural properties, which is divided among all citizens. So this is the idea that all citizens of Croatia should safeguard their heritage. Even though the current legal system does create a three-way system, you have the owners, the state, and all citizens, it is in essence still a relation between the individual owner and the state or its representatives. So the heritage system or heritage sites such as the Star is split between different regimes. Valdemar Hapstein proposed that we understand heritage as a special regime of truth, that it is first of all a moral regime. The moral regime to preserve and conserve is evident, barely questions and criticisms of heritage are seen as iconoclasm or heresy. Even in Karlovac, there's no question that heritage should be protected, right? Because the opposition to protecting heritage is sort of destroying heritage. But of course, this is only sort of part of the discourse. The heritage regime is both material and ethical, economic and emotional, but of course it's not just heritage regimes, it's also property regimes, property law, inheritance law, and so on. And then we suddenly have public and urban management regimes in Karlovac. Just a second. And suddenly you have the idea of heritage becoming a matter of public policy, right? Shaped not only by the legal framework, but also the specific political framing of the economic, social, and cultural interests of the political authority at the time. So public policy is, of course, the system of laws, regulations, courses of actions, and financing priorities regarding the topic promulgated by local government. And it is mostly based on public management models, one in particular, which is the stakeholder model. So it has its roots in economic theory, but it was applied in the 1980s to replace the outdated or traditional shareholder model. A stakeholder is any entity that has an interest within an economic enterprise or a public enterprise that can have either influence or be influenced by its work. So since the 1980s, the stakeholder model has been expanded from the economic sphere into the public sphere, or in actually opposite terms, the public sector sort of adopted private sector practices to increase the efficiency of services and so on, and it has become more and more under public criticism, right, or even academic criticism. Anthropologist Kim Fortune stressed that although the stakeholder model is good because it sort of recognize difference, that its main aim is to manage and control difference by forcing diversity in a consensus, and that it cannot manage too much complexity or dissent. And more further on, the stakeholder model approaches stakeholders as epistemologically homogeneous and consistent. The stakeholders are sort of have, they exist even before the issue arises, and there is this idea that certain categories of stakeholders have certain ways of behaving, right? That the city or the municipality will think logically, legally, materialist, functionalist, in terms of efficiency, while it is not supposed that the citizens will be, as a stakeholder, or the community as a stakeholder would be logical, rational, efficient, but rather subjective, experiential, emotional, and so on. And what Kim Fortune stressed was that stakeholder model actually creates communities where there are none. And so what has happened since the socialist period is that there's been this really conundrum of categories in which citizens are not only owners of private property, but also owners of rights and obligations toward towards the heritage, split between heritage and property and public management, which in essence boils down to the fact that living within heritage isn't a pleasant life. I'll show you in the next slide. What happened also was that a lot of heritage was erased from the public registry. One is the socialist monument on Petrova Gora, you've probably known it, You've probably seen it. I've scoured the National Registry last night to see is it in the National Registry. Because it's a socialist monument, it was erased from the National Registry in the 90s, even though it's gained public attention. What does it mean to live within this heritage regime and within this public management? These on the left, you can see sort of some of the guidelines and measures that have been prescribed for the city core. So people live in this space, and however, conservationists have, conservation department has prescribed the complete protection and conservation of historical structures and cultural and historical values with the utmost respect of tradition and the function of spaces and content. So there's a strict control of introducing new structures. So new structures aren't allowed in the historical site or contents that are foreign or inappropriate to the preserved cultural historical values. The adaptation to contemporary needs should be with only minimal physical interventions into historical structures. The allowed methods for any works on historical structures is sanation, conservation, restoration, reconstruction, if lost, and presentation, and that all interventions must be based on archaeological and conservationist research and their result. What does this mean? This means that people cannot freely do anything within their property, which are mostly apartments or even houses. I wrote down, just a second, some few some few things that I have from my interviews with my informants. According to informants, the conservation department rigorously enforces that it must be consulted on all issues within the historical structures. According to informants, they were informed by the conservation the department that if attempting to sell their property, they first have to offer to sell it to the municipality, since it has, due to the importance of the heritage site, right of first purchase or first offer. Any architectural, engineering, or decorative works on the property must be consulted with the conservation department. So one informant said that they said they have to approve of his choice of tiling for his apartment. Must have an architectural or engineering project. So you have to have a plan and a project before you start any work, and must be done only by official licensed contractors in accordance to conservation guidelines and principles. So, for example, PVC windows and doors are strictly forbidden and must be made entirely for wood, and thermal insulation must be only interior, etc. Of course, what happens is that people can't afford this, so they live in rundown houses because the conservation department doesn't allow for anything, sort of any leeway. But the heritage regime with the star is seen not only in the sort of the strict guidelines for any work within the historical structure, but the importance that the star has for the city. You can see here the logo of the city. Karlovac, the city of Susret, would be in meetings, right? Or the Karlovac County, which has the 6-pointed star as its model, but also it's sort of been inscribed in every social event in Karlovac. Zvijezda na ljeto or Starry Summer is actually the main city city social program, which is you can see here from 2022 and from 2021, where you can see sort of this star being inscribed in almost anything. What happens is, of course, that political parties and private investors are exempt from conservationist guidelines. Pictured here is actually a 19th century Baroque house, citizen house, bourgeois house, that was in a rundown state. It had owners who had abandoned it. However, the conservationist department, although this structure should have been protected and conserved in its original, the conservation department allowed it to be completely destroyed. And it was rebuilt using modern technology and modern materials, even though modern materials are strictly forbidden within the structure. And it now looks like this. Of course, it's called an ambiental reconstruction, which is in Karlovac, the official explanation why it looks like this is ambiental reconstruction, which is a category that is it's not recognized in any way, but by any ordinance or law. So it's a made-up term. And of course, you can see here by the flags, this is actually a political party building. So it's owned by the political party of the ruling party in Karlovac, which explains the blue conservative color. And so now we come to the point of well, what is revitalization? Revitalization is a sensitive topic. It has been equated, although it goes in multiple ways, it is in essence an economic management project, right? It's a public, regardless of the authors or project, its main aim is to sort of increase profit and tax or private income within urban spatial units, which are characterized by low profit or income. And it has been equated, compared, or seen as on the forefront on gentrification processes. So within all, usually it started in America in the 1970s and 1980s with inner urban districts, which were impoverished or distressed due to the suburban zoning and planning and development. It's usually, and this is the case in Karlovac, so residents within these quote unquote dead areas or distressed areas are seen as unable to generate revitalization or to generate income due to social or economic criteria. In Karlovac, it's age, class, and social status. In America, it's of course a matter of race as well. And they're also seen as the cause of urban degradation, right? And it's seen that revitalization can only be possible through influx of developer capital and new, young, or entrepreneurial residents. What is then with the start in Karlovac, the project is, there are multiple projects within the entire management plan. I'm sort of abbreviating it. One set of projects is the communal amenities project, so communal infrastructure in public space, sewage, waterworks, or water supply, electric supply, internet supply, cables, and so on. As Luka Lipshinic said in one interview, most of the Karlovac's communal infrastructure is from the Austro-Hungarian period, so you can see why it's needed. But this is intended to invite people to live here and to give them opportunity to live here. And you have on the other side public service projects, which are connected with repurposing buildings without function, which are mostly owned by the municipality, county, or even state, and creating points of income generation. What happened was that, as Luka mentioned, there were 16 barracks. Much of the most biggest palaces and buildings within the historical site were owned by the army. So after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, it went from the Yugoslavian People's Army to the Croatian Army. But in 2000, the Republic and the state decided that it has to cut its expenses, and sort of transferred its ownership of these buildings to the state and county and municipality level, to the municipality and county level. So the city of Karlovac, the municipality, owns all of these buildings now. What has happened is that legally, legal relations have been a point of issue in Karlovac. The degradation has been caused because multiple people live in multiple apartments in a housing block that was built with multiple apartments. But suddenly the state and the city have been transferring ownership of buildings left and right with one signature without much problem. All of the major projects have been, the legal issues have been resolved within a year since the project started. One public service project is the idea of the student city. There is the Polytechnic School, which wants to become a university and has been expanding and buying property to create public services for students studying in Karlovac. There are also educational centers for excellence, for vocational high schools, and the idea of founding new public institutions such as the cinema, gallery, interpretation center, and so on. But again, what happens is, this is one of the buildings that was under the army control or army ownership. This is the Toy House, or the armory. It is supposed to be as a vocational center of excellence. And this is, you can see down here, the project of it being rebuilt. However, what happened was, after the last earthquake in Croatia, even though, again, the buildings should be preserved in their original structure and new elements should not be introduced, the conservation department claimed that it was statically unsound and dangerous, so they destroyed the entire building. And of course, they're building it from completely new material. The Orthodox Church, which you can see here in the background, is actually the only building that actually followed all the guidelines. It had to import bricks from the Czech Republic to have original Baroque bricks, and you can see here the use of completely new building materials. So my question was and always is, what about the citizens? Because the citizens can't have this easy, quick solutions between ownership, between conservation department allowing them to completely tear down the buildings. If they do anything wrong, they can be financially fined and so on. I worked in the NGO Kamatrix, which had this project with Knowledge to the Star, applying social service learning on community cultural heritage, during which we were cooperating with the Polytechnic School of Karlovac. The project was financed by the EU and the state. The idea was to engage students in Karlovac to motivate and create active citizenship. So the idea was that students would make all the stakeholders involved would create an interpretation plan. So this project started after the management plan for the Star started, and we were reading through it, and we said, okay, we have to change our project in one way. The project, our project was said that we would pick one heritage site in the sense of a building. We decided to say, no, we're going with the public square. We have to emphasize heritage as a common good, so or sort of open heritage to citizen participation, and not talk about buildings, but how can people act. I would show you the interpretation plan, but unfortunately the website is down. One proposal was that every building has an interpretation plaque which would sort of describe the building, but on which people living there could sort of participate and write their own histories. And one of the activities, this is one of the only pictures I managed to find, was that students had these sort of Jane Walk style walks for the citizens, talking about cultural heritage. We tried to open the cultural heritage much more than it was within the heritage discourse. So we didn't talk about the Renaissance city or the Baroque city. We talked about Jewish heritage, anti-fascist heritage. We talked about industrial heritage because the city had several factories within it. We talked about very different issues, and we collaborated with the City Museum. However, I sometimes question, was this a good idea? I use this meme here because it's applicable not only in post-colonialism, but also in these sort of issues in which he says that knowledge is inseparable from the power dynamic producing it, and that decolonization without changes in material condition is only liberal politics serving the colonizer. Because the biggest issue here is recognizing that both the conservation project of recognizing the old city core as was a modernist utopia. So it's in the way that the heritage regime is established, people can't live in that heritage site. It supposes that people will live in 30 square meter houses made from wood, that don't have proper insulation and that don't have any public, it's not in with modern standards. It wasn't up to modern standards in the socialist period. You also have the fact of post-social transformation. The city is severely economically deprived. It's one of the, still holds a record in public, the number of unemployed. It's being rapidly depopulated, and it has, as Luca showed, the sort of neoliberal public management in which the city sort of aims to create easy income, which severely influence the city. And we have to recognize that heritage, at least this moment, is sort of a political tool and affecting different power dynamics. With our project, with the interpretation plan, we wanted to change these power dynamics. We wanted to have a bottom-up approach and say, no, we have to open heritage to the people, and we have to allow the community to form around this heritage and allow the community to talk about this heritage. But the biggest issue here is that not only buildings constitute the past of the community or the heritage of the community. If you talk to people, they're mostly critical about the city and the way Karlovac has been developing. The idea to revitalize the city core has actually been a citizen initiative, and most people are aware of this sort of post-social transformation, and that the reason the city, the old core, is dying is because of, in essence, public management in the 90s and up till now. So in the last 30 years, the city has been degrading in the last 30 years more than it has in its entire history. And so the question is of empowering community, yeah, but sort of which heritage and which relationship and to which past. I think that instead of like talking about, you know, all these types of heritage, of Jewish heritage and mercantile heritage and industrial heritage, we should actually, you know, start talking about how to empower the community in the sense of how their lived experiences and their understandings of different public management policies, such as the ones that Luca presented, this, you know, urbanist plans from the 1950s and 60s and 70s, and sort of material, changing material conditions within the city. You won't revitalize a city core by adding income generation points within it, because nobody will come to live in it, because, you know, Karlovac used to have, the wider city area had 70,000 people. Now the wider city area has 40,000 people. So it lost 30,000 people within the last 10 years due to depopulation, due to immigration, as we joined the European Union. So now the question is, you know, not how to generate income points in the city core, but actually transform the sort of create a new community within the city. So I hope, yeah, I'll stop there because thank you. I hope I didn't exceed my time.
Thank you, Tomislav. I know there is a question from before in the chat, but I will take it at the end so we can finish with the presentations and then we can discuss all together. It's a very general question. So I'll move on to Dario. Welcome, Dario. Is a doctoral student from the University of Ljubljana and is also manages with projects at Spheres. Go ahead, Dario.
Thank you. Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. I'm just gonna share my screen and start. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, yep.
Okay, I'll start it. Okay, I'm gonna try and keep it short, so we are on schedule for the Q&A. My short presentation is just gonna explore further the concept of psychogeography and its possible application in urbanist research or developing new attitudes in architecture. But first, I'm gonna show you what is psychogeography historically, how it developed simultaneously, but conceptually close to some practices, artistic practices in Croatia, and then where do we stand today with the concept of psychogeography. So the concept was made up in the so-called movement of Lettrist International, movement that was facilitated by Guy Debord, who later wrote his very famous book, The Society of the Spectacle. The Lettrist International, something that later in the 50s became the Situationist International movement, was a non-aligned movement opposed to some avant-gardistic tendencies in art and the emergent visual culture of the post-war period in Europe and elsewhere. Also, it was very opposed to the academic Marxism and the cybernetic attempt to overpower sociality with some kind of digital means calculation and programmability of social issues. This movement spread from Paris to the greater area of France and later to Scandinavia and Great Britain, where the Situationists had their allies, but also they had a great deal of correspondence with the adjacent members in the USA and Japan. These kinds of connections were maintained almost exclusively by Guy Debord himself. The concepts which were introduced very early on in this practice were unitary urbanism, concept of dérivé and détournement. These were just some buzzwords that determined their actual practice in space, how they practiced space, and how they tried to navigate the emergent super urban landscapes that were becoming very popular in the post-war period of the rebuilding of cities in a much larger scale than before. These concepts were then transferred to a practice that was mainly consisting of walking, mapping, doing architectural drawings, and some use of what I call a methodic iconoclasm. They refrained from overproducing images or imagery that would make their whole project vulnerable to spectacularization. Most notable work in that respect, with respect to urbanism, is a short pamphlet written by Gilles Yvain, Formulary for a New Urbanism, the architectural project of New Babylon, or Derieville, made by Constant Nieuwenhuis, and The Naked City, which is one of the first and maybe one of the most well-known psychogeographical maps of Paris. The way psychogeography was exercised was not only constrained to a theoretical concept, but it was also practically engaged, especially by Constant. This is a fountain made in 1970 in the Netherlands. It showcased what psychogeography should be able to offer to the urbanistic development. It was a kind of decentering and a kind of overcoming space by leaving it empty but also full, by proposing new flows in the space. But you will, you can probably understand what I mean to say through this photo. But we are gonna skip over it and go a little bit further. At the time of the initial conceptualization of psychogeography, it was not only considered as a way to walk around the city, it was a concept to try and make a psychogeography a sort of attitude towards the everyday life. So this type of psychogeographical game showcases this very well. It says just like to gather people, make a situation out of it, and then you should find the outcome satisfying. I will, of course, give you this presentation later through a follow-up, so you can further examine the notes I have here. Also, Guy Debord wrote his own exercise in psychogeography, which in a more poetic sense showcased what psychogeography should imply. So everybody can be psychogeographical in something, as Postman Cheval is psychogeographical in architecture. The Postman Cheval is, of course, a French protagonist of so-called movement of naive architecture. You can look him up and see why he especially is psychogeographical in architecture. To my point, I would like to add here maybe for better understanding that Franz Kafka is also psychogeographical in architecture if you consider his use of space in his works. You know, when you go like into a castle and you go out through the same door, but it's no longer the same space, or something like that. Some years later, but more or less simultaneously, a certain group in Zagreb, in Yugoslavia, sprung out and did some very, very similar things, but they didn't conceptualize it as a psychogeography, but as a way of introducing conceptual art into artistic practices that were present at the time in former Yugoslavia. This was the Gorgona group, and it's a group that was very similar to the Situationist group, because it also consisted of architects and artists, art critics, and curators. It was not a homogeneous group of philosophers or something like that. They also maintained the contacts with contemporary international artistic community, and they also introduced some new radical concepts to artistic scene and to the cultural scene in general. The collective, somewhat paradoxically, dissolved and became absorbed in the New Tendencies movement. And the New Tendencies movement later became the BIT International movement, which was like an attempt to introduce cybernetics into art. And this was something that the Situationists were very much against. Their concepts of anti-image and art as being, or art being practiced in the everyday life, is somewhat similar to the iconoclastic tendencies in Situationist practice. And in terms of the practice of this Gorgona group, we also have conceptual walks, exclusive, trying to do planning and conceptualizing, but not really producing any tangible objects. As their main body of work consists mostly from anti-magazines, sketches and plans for future works, but also of individual conceptual works, mainly by artists like Julia Kniefer or Ivan Kožarić. And we will see here the project by Ivan Kožarić. It was, of course, a conceptual project called Cutting Out Sljeme. It was a series of collage drawings and projections of the project to cut the Medvednica mountain in half. It was an imaginative effort that was made possible by various walks that the group undertook in the Sljeme region. They walked there frequently and conceptualized types of things that would maybe change the ambiental arrangement in the city and its understanding as a historical city towards somewhat to a somewhat psychogeographical outcome. So these were the practices that were present during the 1960s, maybe into the 1970s. Ivan Kožarić, of course, did some actual work in the city of Zagreb. He did a project for a sculpture that was called the Landed Sun. It was put in the square where the Croatian National Theatre is, also in the 1971, almost at the same time when Constant built his fountain in the Netherlands. However, the Landed Sun is like a huge golden ball that represents the sun. It's landed on the pavement. Later in the early 2000s, another project sprung out from the author whose name I can't remember now, but who devised a project that would take the entire solar system and land it in the city map of Zagreb. And we have now, I think they are still present. You have like small plaques that are on buildings that represent different planets that are in scale with the sun by Ivan Kožarić. And it's a type of a nice materialization of the psychogeographic effort that is no longer a psychogeographic effort because it's embedded in the city, but it showcases how you can consider a city to be like a literal space, the outer space, not just space, urban space, you know. Today, the prevalent practice of psychogeography is artistic and conceptual. It is a tool for visualization, and it is expressed as a cultural artifact in itself. It is like experienced as a practice that is offered by certain NGOs or local activists, and no longer something that has and holds any actual transformative potential. It is no longer an implicit practice, but explicit type of behavior that is commodified. Here I have a very quick Google translation of the project that was called Derive Zagreb, that was done last year. And it is like a project that was founded by Ministry of Culture, but it showed some real lack of respect towards the Situationist International and lack of understanding of what psychogeography actually is. I just bolded out some of these issues that first come to my mind. The phenomenon of Situationist International was not an original impulse of postmodernism. It was a project to overcome modernism, but is in no ways reducible to postmodernist tendency. And this notion that psychogeography lacks methodological guidelines and is thus an experimental project is not in that sense true, because psychogeography has very obvious implicit guidelines and methods how it should be done. And this almost brings us to my concluding remarks, is that psychogeography should be considered as an attitude towards space, as an emotional, aesthetical, and moral extension of a person. And as that, it should be adopted as a daily practice and not as something that is culturally and intellectually differentiated that would only lead to a further alienation. So in that sense, it is a social project. That is something that situationists were very eager to point out and stress the importance of its being understood as a social project, not a project in urbanity or in architecture. So if we are to make some psychogeographic result as an image, to use it as a map or something, that map should, but I would rather say it must be accessible. It must be free, short, simple, unfinished. It should be abstract. It should be reusable. And in that sense of its reusability, it should reflect an ideal. So in the sense when you should materialize a certain psychogeography, it should be transparent with the actual findings in the street. To exemplify this, I devised just some short, possible rules of some imaginative psychogeographical survey. You could go and walk through the city and try and walk only through the sunny spots of the street. Consider, is it even possible? And then define the spots that are in permanent shade that maybe constrain your ability to walk only on the sunny spot in a certain time of the day. You can follow the flow of green or red traffic lights to get to your desired destination. You can walk in search of particular elements. You can survey the surroundings in order to propose new rules of play, or try and visit some public monuments or public areas for public dwelling in some highly unfavorable weather condition, like a blizzard or a heavy rain or something. Some of the essential elements of this practice should include repetitiveness, impressionism, mindfulness, and iconoclasm. I think I already addressed most of those issues. Repetitiveness and impressionism and in mindfulness are here of high importance, because this is the actual way we experience space in our daily life. This is a note to the way the architect should think about space, because the way when you set up a building and you put it in space, you have to be aware of the fact that people are going to experience this building every day, like for the rest of their lives, because they live there, and they're just going to be in repetitive contact with it, even though the architect himself is no longer in the direct contact with the building. So the Situationists saw the city as a materialization of imagination, and as such, they demanded a free and unconstrained use of its various aspects and elements. This is something that is demonstrated over and over in the Situationist project. and in the psychogeography as such as a social project. In a more poetic sense, so our daily use of space is a reflection of our own mindfulness, and this is something that is very important for an architect and an urbanist, which must be practiced daily and implicitly and not on occasion. So this would be my note of how to communally address like the issue of psychogeography. So just to stress once more, it is not a type of cultural activism, it is an attitude, and it is a project in sociality. It is an aid to better understand the urban space, environments, and ambience. It is not a tool per se. You don't have to go over something and say, oh, I did this and that psychogeographically. It should be already implicit in your mindful attitude towards the actors that are going to use the space that you are constructing in their everyday life. And as such, it is a tool for facilitation of community exchange. I have put here some further reading. One reading that I'm very eager to tell you about is the last book made by a historian of architecture, Ian Borden. He wrote a book in 2001 called Skateboarding, Space and the City, Architecture and the Body. And it's one of the best explications of what psychogeography is without the explicit use of the word psychogeography. It even mentions like the Situationist International maybe one time in his book, but the way he discusses the skateboarding as a psychogeographical practice is a very, very favorable way to try and wrap your head around how we should practice space in our daily life. I think you can find most of these books online. I have provided some links and we will provide you with the presentation later. And I have also made one fanzine from our production. It is a number 5 and it's made mostly just from the quotes from various books on psychogeography or works made by situationists themselves. It is they are very short, they are very motivational in some respect, and they show you the attitude of the initial practitioners of this very interesting social praxis. There you have Guy Debord, you have Constant Nieuwenhuis, you have Gilles Ivan, then you have Roel Vaneghem. They are all 3 major commentators and practitioners in the Situationist International. And then you have some commentators like Tom McDonough, who wrote a very important book on the Situationist movement in early 2000s. And of course, Ian Borden's quote about skateboarders as a conclusion to this little fanzine. I have also made you a poster and I will send you, I think Laila, Laila will send you the
media person.
Yeah, our media person. She will send you the link in the chat. Yeah. And you can also print this out for yourself and then fold it and have a fanzine at your disposal to find motivation to practice psychogeography in your daily practice. And this is the end of my presentation. I'm going to try and stop sharing, but my computer might freeze. So if it does, I'm going to switch to Daphne because we are here together in the office, and then we will accept your Q&A. And thank you.
Thank you, Dario. It was a very accessible and clear introduction to psychogeography. I've seen the fanzine has come through the chat for everyone to download.
Okay.
Yeah, you stop sharing.
Yes.
So let us open the floor to the audience for very interesting presentations. As I give them some time to think what they want to that's what they would like to ask and discuss. There was a question in the chat, which I think was originally directed at Luca. It's a fairly general question, so perhaps the other speakers can address it. And it's why all the great urban build-up areas vanished to be replaced with unwanted architecture or inappropriate land uses. How to face the power of money and convince the public opinion. I think this was referring to the examples in Karlovac of the land uses in the cultural streak and other places. I don't know if one of the speakers wants to take that question, Daphne.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to at least answer from, okay, our practice so far, and not necessarily on the example of, let's say, Karlovac, which we showcased here as an ongoing territory. We are being researching and discussing in different instances and different formats over years already, and we will continue. But basically, you know, I would like to start with something that was the basis for me to enter this field of urbanistic activity, let's call it, what we are discussing now, which is connected to the role of NGO in this tripartite way of dealing with urbanization today, which relies on public, private, and civil, although these boundaries between three are very blurry. But I would quote Jane Jacobs, and I would say that you know, the idea that the city should be not how to say, the vanishing of the idea of city and urban development to serve life led to what we are witnessing today, meaning to the common practice nowadays that the city territory became measurable, numerable, selling point, other than to be a place which enables better life, better quality of life. And what she says, what she said in '61, this is why her work was groundbreaking for urban issues, was that once the society starts to perceive and to wish the city to be the place where the quality of life is the predominant variable to take care of, then all the other parameters will be able to be adjusted to this idea, which is exactly the opposite case in what we are observing in all our analysis, not us as NGO, but everybody that deals with urbanity today, in this neoliberal treatment of the city, where the quality of life simply got, how to say, escaped in between the lines of argumentation, which is all the time predominantly putting effort on, let's face it, economic terms. This is how the city is discussed today. Therefore, seeing and assessing the qualities of, all built, how did we have it in the question, old, great, urban, built up, and really going, really seeing city as this palimpsest, which it is. City meaning any kind of urbanization and urban development. It simply ceased to be the topic.
Thank you, Daphne.
And in that sense, what I want to say that, coming back all the time to the initial idea, what does it serve for in society, in different particular situations, to put it as discussion is very important, and it will always be, not to lose it from the sight. And in a way, the NGO part of practice is the one that has, because of its non-definition still or development in time, it has more looseness to put this on the table all the time.
Tomislav, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Daphne said it most, but it also is a question, I mean, Ragda's comment was great, but it also is a question of unwanted or inappropriate by who, right? This decision process in which we can say, okay, this is an unwanted architecture, this is unwanted development or inappropriate land use or so on, is a question of who claims it to be unwanted. Of course, the developers say this is needed and this is appropriate. The cities within the neoliberal treatment of urbanity, of course, support these sort of private ventures. And most cities, you have to have in mind the sort of societal and economic deprivation in which in most cities, not only Karlovac but other cities in Croatia, even Zagreb as the capital of Croatia, people see this sort of what you called unwanted architecture or inappropriate land use as development, which is finally happening due to like 30 years of there being no development, no architecture and so on. And sort of most people say, yeah, it's, it looks ugly, but it's good, it's, appropriate, it's wanted, and really don't think of the political implications of this sort of, architecture. But urban planners are increasingly losing their privileges and rights to determine land use and architecture in Croatia, but all over the world right now. So there is this question of, right, urban planners, experts and citizens don't get to decide, or very much influenced by the context, which is, quite depressing.
Thank you. Dario, did you want to speak or no? Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for the speakers or any comments? I see a couple of people have had to leave for other commitments. I very much enjoyed all the presentations. I think to me what is very interesting and is very significant in terms of a project that we are working on is that all of your work, whether it's more directed towards activism, civil activism, or whether or towards a critical assessment of urban management and governance, it's very, very strongly based on the historical understanding and analysis of both the architecture and the urban form. which is very, very important. It is very, the actions that I've seen presented today are very nicely interlinked with a strong research ethic and the involvement of the community into sort of a scientific understanding of their own environment. I think, unless there are any other last minute questions from the speakers, I think, did you guys wanted to mention something about publication? Do you?
About publication?
A small worksheet publication to follow the activity. It's, well, I hadn't.
We are gonna compile it and we're gonna do it as a follow-up to.
Okay, fantastic.
As a post on our webpage, and then we can share it.
Okay, great. So this we will share it through our kebab channels, and also we will make the video of today's event available to everyone. So last chance for questions or comments. If there aren't any, I will close today's session. Thank you very much again to the speakers and to everyone who participated. I hope to see you soon in another one of our events. Plenty of thanks coming up in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will stop recording. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.